Welcome back to History Class with Dr. W. Now, we are continuing our discussion of the state of the world around the time of Columbus's voyage in 1492. And in fact, in this lecture, we have arrived at that pivotal moment, Columbus's voyage itself. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and the years that followed. And over this next lecture or two, we'll be focusing on Spanish conquest in the Americas. Let me read you the words of one historian who said, "There are moments in history when we can say, at this hour, on this day, the history of the world was changed forever." Such a moment was 2 a.m., October 12, 1492, when Columbus sighted land after his long voyage across the ocean. Indeed, the world was changed forever at that moment. Most pointedly, the impact on the Native American populations was devastating from that point over the next several hundred years. The arrival of the Europeans had a profound impact, which we'll be discussing in just a moment. But it also had a huge impact, of course, on Europe and other populations down the road who would eventually settle in North America as well. While initially the discovery of the Americas is thought to be sort of an impediment on the way to Asia, eventually it is realized the kind of resources and riches that the Americas provide. So we're going to be talking about a few of these factors in this lecture and then beginning a discussion of the process of Spanish conquest. So let me draw your attention to this map of some of the early explorations. These pink lines down here indicate Columbus and his 4 voyages to the Americas. And I would simply point out, by way of thinking about that Columbus himself never really reached much of North America at all, never had a real understanding of what exactly it was he had discovered. And in fact, Columbus went to his death believing that he had landed on some kind of outer boundaries of Asia. And it's only the explorers who come after Columbus who realize that in fact they had not discovered Asia, but an entire new continent. Nonetheless, it is the Spanish who initiate this process of settling in the New World and, of course, conquest, which we're going to be talking about in just a moment. But understand that initially the Spanish are on a quest for treasure, for gold, for silver, and they are profoundly disappointed when they don't encounter those kinds of commodities. And so the initial decades of Spanish exploration and settlement are going to be ones trying to reckon with what exactly has been discovered and what they might make out of it. So we're going to be going into some detail about some of the Spanish explorations. We don't have time in these lectures to cover all of them in great detail, but I want to point out some of the significance of those explorations more broadly, because pretty soon we're going to be turning our attention to English settlement, which will be the focal point of these early chapters. But the Spanish do have some profound impact in their early explorations for a number of different reasons. One of which is the process of beginning to enslave the Native Americans, which began really with Columbus. It was on his second voyage that Columbus brought back to Europe several hundred Native Americans. And the process of enslaving the Indians begins there and only carries forward. Now we're going to talk about how that ultimately transitions into the slavery of Africans as a preferred labor source. But right from the beginning, the Spanish begin enslaving Indians. There is also the devastating impact of disease, which again begins right with those initial Spanish explorations. The Spanish don't have to make very deep inroads into the Americas for the spread of disease to have just a ravaging impact. And the populations in the Caribbean in particular are more or less wiped out within 25 years or so of the initial contact. Another early impact of the Spanish is the mixing of races. Those early explorations were all male. There were no women on the ships, and so the Spanish, very early on, after arriving in the New World, begin the process of mixing with Native American women At times, this was a violent undertaking. In other cases, Native American populations would give the Spanish conquistadors some of their women as kind of an act of peace. Whatever the causes, right from the beginning, you begin to see this mixing of the races and the creation of a new race known as the mestizo race, a mix of Spanish and Indian. And finally, very early on, you begin to see missionaries as part of this process. So you have conquistadors, you have conquerors, you have explorers, you have those who are looking for gold and wealth, and you have missionaries, and we'll be talking more about those going forward in just a bit. As one Spanish chronicler noted, "We came here to serve God and also to get rich." That sums it up pretty well. Now, we're going to be talking in just a moment here about the process of Spanish conquest. And the year 1521 turns out to be one of the most pivotal years in the history of the world, and certainly in our process. So there are two key events that occur in that year 1521. The first one that I want to point out is that the explorer Ferdinand Magellan in 1521 becomes the first person to successfully circumnavigate the globe. That is, he sails around the world. This is not only a remarkable act, but it's very important because now we understand what exactly is out there and how far you have to go to get around certain continents and things like that. And so Ferdinand Magellan's voyage proves that the Portuguese route sailing south around Africa is going to be quicker and easier than any kind of Spanish route sailing out to the west if your ultimate objective is to reach Asia. And so, in short, Magellan's voyage proves to the Spanish and the rest of the world that North America and the Americas are not going to be easily passed over on the way to Asia. In other words, you need to make the most out of what is there. You need to find resources there and extract whatever riches you can from the Americas, because you're not just going to bypass them quickly on your way to Asia. The other key event of the year 1521 is the conquest of the Aztecs by the Spanish conquistador Hernan Cortez and his men. And actually, that story and some of the other parts of what we want to talk about is a little more involved than I want to go into at the end of this lecture. So I will stop here for now, and in the following lecture, pick up with Cortez and the conquest of the Aztecs.